Hey everyone, it's Eddie Kalegi reminding you that each and every episode of Sports Speak is powered by SeatGeek. SeatGeek is a one-stop shop for tickets to concerts, sporting events, and so much more. And now you can use the promo code SportsSpeak on the site to get $20 off your first purchase. So what are you waiting for? SeatGeek. Let there be live. And now on to the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Sports Speak powered by SeatGeek. It's episode 135. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Well, we're both big auto racing fans. If you haven't watched this show for the last 3 years, you'll know it, particularly NASCAR. We watch that a lot. We've both been to races before. It's a lot of fun. And for people who follow any walk of motorsports, Memorial Day weekend is maybe the biggest spectacle because you have major events in 3 of the most predominant series in the world. NASCAR has arguably their second biggest race, the Coca-Cola 600. The Indianapolis 500, maybe the world's biggest race, is sandwiched in between that and the morning race, which is Monaco, the Grand Prix for Formula One through the streets of Monaco. Always a fun time, such a scenic circuit that they go to. So we're going to break it all down. But we'll start with NASCAR because that's our focus. And we'll transition now first, before we talk about Charlotte, to what transpired this past week. Now, I have come on this show before, and I have said to me the All-Star race is pointless in NASCAR because 2/3 of the field makes it. And you look at any other sport where it's about 5% of the players or the athletes make it into their All-Star event. For NASCAR, 67% of theirs gets to compete. But I will say, I think they hit a home run with North Wilkesboro. Yes, the race was kind of boring because Kyle Larson was insanely fast and was the only one who could use the concrete on the exits of 2 and 4, and because the next gen car still has its problems at short tracks. But that's something that can be improved. I think having a non-gimmicky all-star race where you go to some sort of a local track that, let's be honest, probably couldn't host a NASCAR Cup Series event in the current landscape, a points race, and go there for a special event like this. Beyond North Wilkesboro, you got Nashville Fairgrounds. There's so many tracks that NASCAR used to go to and don't anymore, but a supportive base would show up and be there. I think that's something that NASCAR can really build on to make the All-Star race just a little bit more meaningful. And while last night's race was a little bit boring and a little bit of a letdown, it was still a lot of fun, and clearly the fans there had a great time.
Yeah, I'll say it like this. 3 out of the 4 races there throughout the weekend were absolutely excellent. Unfortunately, it was just the main event that didn't live up to the expectations or hype. But I say it like this, a lot of people are going to be talking about, North Wilkesboro wanting to be on the schedule next season as regular season race. And, I think that would be an absolute great thing for the sport, having it on the schedule, and mixing it around as another short track option. But I would like to see more not done to the track. I think Dale Jr. and his group with everybody else of restoring this track has done an excellent job. But I'd love there to be more to be done, maybe, with gearing or other things, just to try to make this track a little bit more raceable. You can only do so much from a track perspective. But again, when you have 3 races out of the weekend be absolutely perfect and the one group of cars not, what the problem is. But I will say this too. I like the idea, Eddie, of there being all-star races at different places every year in different local places. But the way I feel is honestly, I like to go to the contrary, or the opposite idea. I like the idea that every year you go into speed weeks, you open up at Daytona. I'm still a big person about the Daytona Clash. I'm not saying I don't like the LA Clash, but I feel if you want to say all-star, make your stars shine, why are we not doing it at the LA Coliseum in the summer? That's what I don't get to me. That could be your all-star race. That's where the all-star race should be, not the start of the season. So I feel like that's the idea I'd rather see NASCAR do. Unfortunately, it's not going to be that way, but I can live with it. The crowd absolutely electric in North Wilkesboro this weekend. I'm glad it's back in NASCAR. I hope there's a lot more other tracks that can come to life in NASCAR. But as Joey Logano said last night, not every race is going to be your cup of tea. That's life. That's called being a NASCAR driver and a NASCAR fan. There's going to be a lot of mile and a halfs we don't like. There's going to be a lot of road courses you don't like. But without living and growing and making adjustments, you can't always blame the racetrack or all these other things. A lot of it comes with the car or maybe even driver responsibility. So I think that coming from that perspective, there's a lot still left to change in the car aspect. But I think the All-Star race next year, if North Wilkesboro is not going to be a points race, would love to see it back. But I definitely want to see it on the schedule moving forward, regardless of how the race went.
I agree. And I like what you said too about the LA Coliseum and with the Clash. Because again, the Clash, if you go back in the history books, it was started as sort of a way to extend speed weeks in Daytona, but it no longer serves that purpose. It's happening 2 weeks outside of the schedule. And I think LA is a cool event. It's a different type of track, and of course, it's a track that you could never go to for a points race. North Wilkesboro, you can. You just have to iron out the car on the short tracks. It's just as good of a short track for NASCAR racing as Martinsville or Bristol or Richmond are. And of course, it was on the schedule for 47 years. LA could be a great all-star event, and with the Clash no longer being at Daytona to extend the speed weeks, to me, it really doesn't serve all that much of a purpose when it happens. And the ratings have been good, but not great, because when it happens in early February, there's so much going on at the same time. You have the Grammys, you're in the middle of right before Super Bowl, you've got the NBA All-Star game. Chances are the Clash is going to go up against one of those three events that it's not going to go against the Super Bowl, but the NBA All-Star game or the Grammys, and both of those are going to take a lot more casual viewers than the Clash would. A race at the Coliseum in the summer, when baseball is the only one of the four major sports going on and there's not much happening during the summer on television, I think could be beneficial. Will it be hot in LA? Yes, but if you race at night, baseball games are played at night without it being sweltering, so it's something to consider. But let's look ahead now to this weekend. We'll start with Formula One in Monaco. Now, last year's Monaco Grand Prix wasn't great because there was a lot of rain in the forecast. Sergio Perez got the win. Charles Leclerc is due. Of course, this is his home track. He is from Monaco, the 25-year-old for Ferrari. But this year, Red Bull has just been so dominant. And it's funny. I think F1, there might be some fans right now that are a bit underwhelmed because a lot of Formula One's core base that has sort of developed over the last couple of years is all from the Netflix show. And it's a lot of kids who did not follow the sport before 2020. And 2021 was that crazy year with Verstappen and Hamilton going for the championship. Last year was pretty chaotic too, even though Verstappen won it pretty easily. This season's been pretty predictable. Fernando Alonso's been the big upset for Aston Martin, but the two Red Bulls have just cruised all year, and I wouldn't be surprised if they win again at Monaco. So I think it's important now for F1 fans that are new to the sport to realize that this is kind of how the sport is at times. There can be a dominant team, just the way it develops. It was that way with Mercedes 5 years ago. And maybe as time goes on this season, Mercedes and Ferrari will improve. Monaco, though, is a good spot for Ferrari to step up because their number one driver is back at his home track.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great opportunity for Ferrari to step up. And the big thing, though, about Monaco is, again, that not just the last 5 races, it feels like almost now for eternity. The problem with Monaco is that there's no overtaking because it's just not a wide enough racetrack, and it wasn't really designed for the cars of these size. Monaco's a tradition, and I'm glad F1 goes there every year, but I expect there at most to maybe be 2 overtakes on that first lap, and then that's it. That's it. That's the rest of the race. Whoever's running where will be where they end up finishing. So I think that, it's a good opportunity for Ferrari, but again, it emphasizes qualifying well, being on your marks well, and making sure you hit the track as good as you can be, because instantly, and honestly, I feel like this, yeah, you hope somebody has difficulties or whatever, but if I'm in the back, I honestly don't even know if I would want to be on the racetrack, because what is there to know? You're not going to gain spots. It's just one of those races that you just have to really tough out and hope a lot happens. But we haven't really had an eventful Monaco Grand Prix, and I want to say, 5 years? Maybe 6? Well, I can't even remember when the last eventful where there was a lot of crashing Monaco Grand Prix happened. So with that being said, I just feel that it's going to be a big opportunity, but man, it's like, yeah, it could be that one outlier of being an eventful Monaco Grand Prix, but I just don't really expect much, which is why I think Monaco, of course, is the first of the big 3 events, throughout the weekend to go. I just feel like I don't want to say the most meaningless, but the most, the most lack of interest one to watch, not just because the times don't match up either, just because of the fact that once a year after the first lap, it's like, all right, you watched the checkered flag essentially, and now it's on to the Indy 500.
Yeah, I I don't disagree with you necessarily, at least in terms of the fan appeal to me as a viewer. Monaco is the least interesting of the three. I would have argued a couple of years ago, actually, like 4 or 5 years ago, Charlotte kind of was with the way the package was for NASCAR. But now, what we saw last year, we'll talk about in a few minutes. It to me,
Or
it's
what you saw on Saturday makes
yes,
you inclined to believe that it's going to be a wreck fest, because I do believe the Cup Series will be a wreck fest in Charlotte. I
yes,
just
yes, it probably will. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But let's go to the Indy 500. Now, something that I think is kind of special that was back this year in Indianapolis was bump day. And I know only one car was bumped, and that's kind of unfortunate. And some people might say, well, you get 34 entries, might as well put them all in the race anyway if only 34 are there. It's not like you have the 40 car entry list that you used to for IndyCar. But that bump day format with last chance qualifying, I was watching it on Sunday before the North Wilkesboro heats North Wilkesboro Open started, and that was fun. The fact that Jack Harvey and that team were able to get out there and get the one last run in to be able to jump Graham Rahal, and talk about a wild mix of emotions for Bobby Rahal. He had 3 of his 4 cars in danger of going home on bump day, and the one car for him has this miraculous run to get into the field, but the car that misses it is his own son. So just so much is going on there in his mind. And it, to me, for IndyCar, this is part of what makes the Indy 500 so special. And it's amazing. For NASCAR, I feel like for qualifying and stuff, I know the duels happen for Daytona, but back in the day of DNQs, if there was only one DNQ for a race, there was never this much drama. But the IndyCar format for qualifying you have right now, and then when you go from 12 to 6 to 1, and ultimately Palou putting up that ridiculous lap time with Rinus VeeKay right there, it's just IndyCar has really culminated it to me having the perfect qualification system for the Indy 500.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was kind of talking about this late last night with Ryan Mineker and others, Vincenzo Iacovazzi, about how can you transition something like this into NASCAR? Because obviously NASCAR teams, and I know we're not jumping NASCAR, but the fact that NASCAR teams aren't going to be so excited to make a mock Indy 500 in NASCAR just because NASCAR's already been there. But when you view it of IndyCar, what I love about Indy qualifying so much, and granted, I know of past few years didn't really have bump day, and you only have one car get bumped yesterday. But what to me makes it so special is that it tells stories. It gives stories, and the whole weekend is built around story and hope. The Daytona 500, what makes it so unique is not just because it's the great American race, but in the past, you used to have 60 teams. Of course, this year we saw a lot of teams show up. You'd have 60, 70 teams showing up, and there's no guarantee, no matter how good of a driver you are, that you exactly lock yourself into the show, going back, of course, in the 80s, 90s, and so on. What makes the Indy 500 qualifying so great is there's no charter system. You're in based on your speed. How you do is how you make the show, or if you don't make the show. And I think it's tough for, obviously, for Graham Rahal not making a show, and you see that miracle run by Harvey. But I think that alone is a story of itself, which is what makes it so beautiful, so excellent. And I still feel the Indy 500 it's not the main event. The Coke 600, of course, is, but it's still the best spectacle there is throughout the entire weekend, because there's always stories about it. And that's the reason why, again, I hope that NASCAR can just find a way to take some stuff off of that. Because I truly think that, I know everybody's pushing to keep the charter system in NASCAR, but when you get stories like that in qualifying for big key racing events, it makes it ever so much more special. And that's the reason why I think there's going to be a lot of talking points going into this Sunday for the Indy 500. Not just about Harvey, about all these other teams, about the struggles. Because the other thing, too, you have to remember, and it's the last point I'll make about it, is you have to remember they've been practicing an entire week at Indy. They have this whole spectacle. It's almost like a NASCAR Speed Week when you go to Daytona. They make the individual event feel more value. Of course, it counts towards double points value as well, essentially. But you have to think about it from that perspective. And if NASCAR can find a way to do that outside of the Indy 500, I think in F1 too, if they can do that a lot more for other tracks that they go to make it feel more special, I think that it can really stand out. And I think IndyCar has it nailed, and Roger Penske has been on top of things since day one. I just hope that Indianapolis continues to get the respect it does from a fan turnout. I think last year, right, they had the biggest turnout in history, if I'm not mistaken. So I hope that it can only get bigger and better. And I really do think this year's Indy 500, regardless if it's not going to be the greatest of all time in terms of a passing perspective, I still think it's going to be one of the heaviest attended of all time, and arguably one of the funnest to watch all time. And having bump day back, I think, is just such a meaningful part of setting up that tempo and energy for the weekend.
And on the other side of the grid, well, it's also the fastest front row of all time. Alex Palou cruising to the pole, got a challenge from Marinus VK. And there's some big storylines that we're going to talk about. So again, you can follow us on Twitter at SportsSpeak Live. We do our NASCAR pick'em, but because of this weekend, I'm throwing a little gimmick into this. So me, Tim, Drew, and Eric will be picking all three races, and the points that will be added will be IndyCar and F1 points in addition to the NASCAR points to our total points for the season based on who wins that race. So there's a little extra to
are we doing the double points for IndyCar?
We're going to do the
Does that mean that you could be talking about a lot of points?
We're doing the single points for IndyCar. So we're going to take what they get, split it in half, and F1 is going to be the regular points. So you could end up with 0 with if something crazy happens at Monaco. So that's what's going to make this weekend extra meaningful. So you can follow on Twitter for our picks at SportsSpeak Live. Those will come out on Saturday. But let's talk about the race itself up at the front and the storylines there. So of course, Penske, big favorite because their cars and their owner owns the track, and Penske has had so much history in the past, but they have some drivers on that team that have never won the Indy 500 before. Joseph Newgarden is one who is absolutely due. Scott McLaughlin, who's won at Texas before, has run well on the ovals. He's someone else I think you definitely have to have on your radar. Alex Palou has been the fastest car so far throughout the week and a half that they've been running on the oval. And then you've got Arrow McLaren. Now, this is the team, remember, that in the partnership with Carlin Racing had the shocking bump day moment in 2019 when Fernando Alonso managed to miss the field. But now McLaren has a stacked roster. You have Pato O'Ward, Alexander Rossi, who, by the way, has won the Indy 500 before. O'Ward almost won it last year. And you have Tony Kanaan as well on that team, along with Felix Rosenqvist. Kanaan making his final Indy 500 start after debuting on the Yard of Bricks 22 years ago. So looking at this field, plus you have some other veterans that are back. Ryan Hunter-Reay is running, and he made it into the field. Marco Andretti's there. Elio, of course, knows how to win even when he's a part-timer. He's done that before in Indianapolis. What is the biggest storyline to you, Tim, heading into Sunday, looking at this stacked 33-car field?
It's tough because honestly, I think about last year, about Scott Dixon, about how many times, and it feels like every year it's a big headline for coming in. Can Scott Dixon finally get his redemption and finally win in Indianapolis? But honestly, to me, I think the biggest thing to look for, not exactly much of a storyline, but I think the biggest thing to look for is, can Pato get his revenge? You know, I feel that Pato is going to be very, very good in the 500. And I feel that he has a little bit of motivation coming into this weekend to prove that, you know, yeah, he could have probably stuck that move last year, but to prove that he still has the capability of being this elite talent that we know him to be. You know, I think Pato's an excellent driver. I honestly think he's one of my favorites in IndyCar just because of how he handles himself and how he races on the track. And I just think that Pato O'Ward's going to be on an opportunity to prove himself and really stand out. And of course, you mentioned on the end of Roger Penske, you know, I think from a story perspective, you know, coming out with a lot of speed for them is huge, but it's like, this is Roger Penske's track. You get what I'm saying? It's like, how can the boss not really dominate his own track? To me, just, you know, blows my mind a little bit. But I think Scott McLaughlin is going to be the one that definitely stands out, I feel, for a bit of Penske in the race. You know, I know speed means a lot. Speed has shown a lot in past years, but I really don't think it makes the difference maker when you talk about the race. Because, yeah, it's one thing to get great track position. But what you have to remember, Eddie, is that There's going to be a lot of snaking throughout the race. There's going to be a lot of fuel saving tactics. Starting on the pole in the Indy 500 is not exactly the most ideal thing to do because it means you're going to burn a lot more gas than others. And remember, it's not like NASCAR. There's no stages. There's no things. It's a straight up race, lap 1 through 200. And if the caution comes out and the race ends under caution, then it ends under caution. That's the unfortunate part of IndyCar that you just have to deal with. But the fact of the matter is this, is that I think Penske has a lot of very good cars this week. It's the fact that can they stay together? I don't know. Again, that's the reason why I think, and not to jump to predictions, of course, I'll have my time for the pick'ems, but I think that Pato O'Ward's going to be the one to watch this weekend.
Yeah, and Ward's been so consistent to start the season. Finished second the first two races of the year, races where he almost won. And Arrow McLaren is certainly due. And as a team, as a unit, with their four cars, might be the best team so far. But it can all change on Sunday. And we've also seen the dramatics in the Indy 500. And sometimes it comes down to the final turn after 200 laps. So we'll just have to wait and see. But let's finish with NASCAR. So I hearken back to last year, and we recorded at like midnight after the marathon Coke 600. And I said to you, I've been watching NASCAR regularly since 2011, from start to finish, with the exception of Chicagoland in 2018. That Charlotte race was my favorite NASCAR race I have ever watched. I know it got a little messy at the end and there were some wrecks, especially the crazy four wide moment, but the intensity from the drop of the green flag and the fact that we saw that same intensity for 400 laps at Charlotte Motor Speedway, combined with the fact that the next gen car thrives most on the intermediates and Charlotte is a perfect track. We're coming off of the last mile and a half race, which was one of NASCAR's best with the next gen car just 3 weeks ago at Kansas. And you've got this bad blood and scores that weren't necessarily settled yet in the All-Star race because there wasn't a lot of passing. And the Larson-Chastain rivalry, I think, will be one we'll really pay attention to because both of those guys, I believe, will be two of the primary frontrunners when it comes down to it on Sunday. We've seen Toyota show up when it matters in the Coke 600. We know Chevy is great on the intermediates, and maybe a Ford or two could surprise. Penske has done well in this race before. But the Coke 600, to me, Tim, I think this is going to be one of the best races of the NASCAR season. And if you're someone just trying to get into the sport and wants to see something maybe instead of the Daytona 500, you'll get your wrecks, you'll get your fun. And I think the Coke 600 is really going to deliver on Sunday night.
I absolutely do think it's going to deliver. And yeah, maybe it's not going to go as long as last season's. Of course, 421 laps, a lot of overtime, the longest Coke 600 of all time. I don't think it'll go that far at all. But I do think this weekend, the teams you're going to want to watch for, especially if maybe you're watching it for the first time, of course, Hendrick Motorsports, Kyle Larson has been absolutely dominant over the last 5 weeks. He's already showing exactly why he's a title threat and an absolute favorite to win this race. Of course, he's won this race prior, or even last year. Remember, you can't forget, and the reason why I always advise if you want to watch this race this weekend, Kyle Larson wrecked the car, what was it, 4 times last year? I want to say it was like at least 4 or 5 times and still came back at the end and almost won this race. Of course, Denny Hamlin ended up sneaking the victory away. But Kyle Larson put himself in position at the end of the day to win the Coke 600 last season and it didn't happen. I think he can absolutely get his revenge and do it. But I think the person, by the way, to watch for this weekend, I don't know if you saw what happened at the end of North Wilkesboro. I know there was a lot of controversy about Bubba Wallace flipping off the crowd. Turns out that there was racist fans hijacking his radio. So that was an interesting topic. But I think that 23XI has been very sneaky fast at these mile and a halves. And I think Bubba Wallace, Tyler Reddick, two drivers that I think that will absolutely stand out this weekend. If you're a fan looking for somebody to back, I think those two drivers have what it takes to win a Coke 600 and last the endurance. I think 23XI is going to be really good. I think they're going to be even better than Gibbs this weekend.
Yeah, I would not be surprised either if that happens. They've really shown up in these mile and a halves, and Kansas is good for them, but Charlotte is similar to Kansas. There's some differences. It's not as wide, but in terms of the actual track, of course, as a mile and a half cookie cutter oval, there are some real similarities, and they have been consistently one of the best teams there. But Joe Gibbs Racing, they have won some races recently. Truex and Hamlin both getting to victory lane in the last few weeks, and Both of them know how to get it done. Hamlin just won at Kansas, the most recent mile and a half. Truex had the most dominant performance ever at the Coke 600, leading over 375 laps there a few years ago, back when he was in the 78. So it's definitely possible for them to have a big weekend, but we are excited to bring it to you, and we'll have our picks on Saturday on the Twitter at SportsSpeak Live. Next week, when we do our next episode, in addition to some baseball talk, NBA Finals preview, we'll get some NASCAR and IndyCar reactions as well, so you won't want to miss that. And a reminder once again that SportsSpeak is now powered by SeatGeek. You can go use the promo code SportsSpeak, all caps, one word, and get $20 off your first purchase at online checkout. But until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
And this was SportsSpeak episode 135. Enjoy the greatest weekend in racing.